Keen was standing in my backyard when he said it, my own grill smoking behind him, my own grass under his feet, my own beer, the last of a six-pack I'd bought that morning, in his hand. He leaned toward the couple from next door, the Hendersons, who'd moved in 3 months ago, and couldn't possibly have known what they'd walked into. And he said it the way people say things they've been rehearsing. Honestly, between you and me, those two have been riding on family goodwill their whole lives, Bo and that kid of his. He laughed. My sister-in-law laughed at her plate. My mother set her glass down and turned her head slightly to the left, which is what she does when she agrees but doesn't want to own it. Wilder was on the tire swing at the back of the yard. He was 8. Old enough to register tone, young enough to be spared the words. He kept swinging. The rope creaked against the branch in a slow, even rhythm. I set the spatula down on the grill rack, carefully, no drama. Keen, I said. He looked at me. Whose name is on the deed to this property? He used the smile, the sideways, what's your problem, let's not do. This smile he'd had since we were teenagers, and he wanted to make a problem disappear by making me feel like I was the problem. Come on, man, don't make it weird. Whose name? The Hendersons found something very interesting to study in their lemonade glasses. My mother said, Beaumont, in that full name voice she keeps for when she wants me to stand down. I didn't. You have 30 days, I said. Then I walked inside, washed my hands at the kitchen sink, and called my attorney. My name is Bo. I'm 32. I work in data security. I consult for mid-sized firms and regional agencies here in Raleigh, North Carolina, helping them find the weaknesses in their systems before anyone with bad intentions does. I spend my days looking for patterns that don't belong, discrepancies in records, access that shouldn't exist. I document what I find. I close the gaps. It turns out that skill transfers to more situations than I expected. I'm also a father. My son Wilder is 8, and he is without question the most organized person in our household. He keeps a red spiral notebook, his name in permanent marker on the cover, where he logs things, model rocket launch heights, box scores from the NC State games we go to, the exact number of days it took a caterpillar he found in the yard to complete its chrysalis. I taught him early that writing things down mattered. He took that more seriously than I did. This is the story of what happens when you apply that same discipline to your own family and discover that the people calling you lucky had been quietly using your name as currency for years. If any of this sounds familiar, if you've got your own folder, your own documentation, your own family member who borrows more than money, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Some of the most important things I learned from strangers on the internet who'd been through it first. And if this story helps someone find the nerve to open their own folder, then telling it was worth it. Before the barbecue, before the 30 days, before all of it, there was the autumn my father died, and the phone call from my brother that came 6 weeks after. My father went fast. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that introduces itself already running late. From diagnosis to the end was about 5 months, which is enough time to say what needs saying, but not enough time to feel like you've really said it. He spent a weekend in October, when he was still strong enough to travel, looking at this house with me before I put in the offer. He walked every room. He stood in the backyard for a long time without saying much. In the car on the way back to the highway, he said, "That's a good house, Bo. It'll hold." He died in March. I drove 4 hours to collect his things. His tools, mostly. He'd been a contractor for 30 years, and he kept his equipment with the kind of care that told you he'd earned every piece of it. Red toolbox, worn smooth on the handle, his level, his tape measure, his initials burned into the toolbox lid when he was younger than I am now. I brought everything back to Raleigh in the bed of my truck and put it in the garage. Keen called 8 weeks later. I was at the kitchen table going through estate papers when my phone lit up with his name. His voice came in even, smooth and measured in the way he gets when the ask is already loaded and waiting before he's admitted what it is. He and my sister-in-law had lost their lease. The building was being sold. They needed somewhere to land while they figured out next steps. 3 months, he said. 4 at the outside. I sat with it overnight before I called Senna. Senna is my closest friend from the firm. She runs compliance audits, the kind of work that requires you to be impossible to confuse and impossible to rush. We'd built 4 years of friendship on shared bad office coffee and the mutual understanding that neither of us does well with vague agreements. "Can you do it without it costing you?" she asked. if it's short, if it's clear. Then put everything in writing, she said. Duration, rent, utilities, the end date. Not as a threat, just as a document, because memory is not a contract. I typed up a 2-page roommate agreement that night. 3 months, they'd contribute to utilities and groceries. The end date, January 31st, was bolded and underlined. I sent it to Keen as a PDF. He signed it with a laugh and the words, "Very you, man," and I printed the signed copy and filed it in a folder in the cabinet under my desk. October and November were fine the way a held breath is fine. My sister-in-law was tidy and warm with Wilder in a way that was genuine rather than performed. Keen worked from the dining room table on his photography business, the one that had been perpetually 6 months from taking off for the better part of 3 years. My mother called every few days, which is to say she called to check whether I was being adequately generous, and I told her things were fine, because in those months, they were. December is when I noticed the first thing. A bank notification on my phone, not a fraud flag, just an account activity alert for a linked account I didn't recognize. I called the number on the notification. A representative at a regional utility company confirmed that an account had been opened in my name 3 weeks prior at an address across the city, an address I had never been to. I stayed calm on the call. I asked them to flag the account. I wrote down the representative's name, the case number, the date, and the time. Then I opened a new folder on my laptop, titled it with just the date, and started filling it. Over the next 3 weeks, I found 3 more. A streaming service subscription, a hardware store credit line, a cell phone family plan, all in my name, all carrying my social security number. 2 had my home address on file. 1 had a different address, a studio space on the south side of Raleigh that, after a quick public records search, I found was leased to a photography operation. A photography studio, no revenue on record. My name covering the deposit. I didn't say a word, not to Keen, not to my mother. Senna had once told me, in a completely different context, that you never confront before you have everything. Because the moment someone knows you're watching, the story changes. So I kept filling the folder. I kept being polite at dinner. I kept watching Wilder do his homework at the kitchen island, and I kept thinking, not yet. January 31st came on a Wednesday. Keen mentioned it that morning, the way you mention an inconvenience you've decided to treat as negotiable. The rental market was brutal. They were close to signing somewhere. It would just be a little longer. He said this over coffee, casual, the way a person speaks when they've already decided the conversation isn't really happening. My mother called that afternoon. She said family didn't work on deadlines. She said my father would have understood. I thought about my father standing in the backyard of this house in October, hands in his jacket pockets, nodding at the property line like he was approving something. I'll give them 30 more days, I said. I called my attorney the same afternoon. He was a property and contract specialist, referred to me by a colleague, direct in the way I respect, the kind of person who does not waste a word. I laid out everything, the roommate agreement, the expired date, the 4 fraudulent accounts, the studio address I'd traced. He listened without moving. When I finished, he set down his pen. The credit accounts are your fastest moving problem, he said. Those are fraud and they have a paper trail. File disputes with all 3 bureaus this week. Contact each company directly, request the account creation records, and open a police report, not necessarily for prosecution right now, just to establish the timeline on paper before anything shifts. He paused. For the property, we do a formal notice, certified mail, the roommate agreement as Exhibit A, no room for interpretation. I drove home with a task list and the particular kind of clarity that comes from putting a problem into capable hands. The credit companies were brisk when I called with documentation. They flagged the accounts. 2 of them had IP addresses in the creation logs that matched devices registered to my home network, devices I had never set up. 1 account had been opened with a scanned document carrying my signature. The signature was wrong. The loops were too tight. Someone had practiced, but not practiced quite enough. I sent the scans to my attorney. He responded in under an hour, noted, saving to file. This changes the category. Forgery is a word with edges. I'd found unauthorized accounts, which was bad enough. But looking at my own name written in someone else's hand, someone I'd shared a bedroom wall with until I was 16, someone I'd covered for and defended in arguments I had no business, someone I'd lent money to 3 separate times and stopped counting, that required more than 1 night to process. I processed it over several nights. One of them, I went out to the garage to sort my father's toolbox. I do this when I need something to do with my hands. I clean the tools that need it, put everything back in the right place. It helps me think without thinking. In the bottom drawer, under a jumble of hardware and a broken tape measure, I found something I hadn't put there. A small digital voice recorder, gray scuffed, the battery compartment sealed with a strip of electrical tape, the kind my father used to keep in his truck for recording job estimates and notes to himself. I stared at it for a moment. The toolbox had been at Keen's apartment for nearly 2 years. He'd borrowed it when they first moved in, returned it with the funeral things in a box labeled Dad's Stuff, and I'd moved the whole box to the garage without going through it carefully. I hadn't thought about it since. I pressed play. My father's voice. He'd spoken the date at the start of the recording. That detail was so completely him that it made my chest do something complicated. The recording was 4 years old. He spoke for 11 minutes, measured and clear, the way he was when he wanted to make sure something was understood. He talked about his estate and his wishes. He said the money he'd contributed to my down payment was a gift to me specifically, not a family resource, not something to be divided or claimed. He named the amount. He said he'd watched a pattern long enough to name it out loud. He said Keen had borrowed money from him on 7 separate occasions and had not repaid any of them. He said he loved both his sons, but he did not trust them in the same way, and that the difference mattered and he wasn't ashamed to say so. At the end, he said, "Bo, if you're hearing this because something happened to me, then I need you to know, the house you're in is yours, built on your work and your choices. Don't let anyone rewrite that." I sat on the garage floor for a long time with the recorder in my hand. Then I went inside, found my phone, and recorded the playback, clean audio, timestamped on my device. I emailed the file to my attorney at 11:15 that night with the subject line, "New development. Please advise when you can." He responded at 7 the next morning, "This is significant. Save every copy. We'll talk today." I won't spend long on the online piece, because it was the part that looked the most dramatic and mattered the least. 2 days after the barbecue, my mother posted a video from her living room. Composed, prepared, tearful in precise measure, she described a son who had grown cold after his father's death. She said I had threatened to remove my brother from the family home. She said Wilder was being raised in a household without warmth or community. The comments filled fast, strangers who knew only what she'd told them, offering her comfort, attaching words like heartless to a version of me I didn't recognize. I watched it once. I didn't respond. Senna called within the hour. "Not one word," she said. "Not on social media, not to her directly, not to anyone who might relay it. You know what's in your folder. Let the folder speak." She was right. She is almost always right. The part I sat with was Wilder. He was going to see it eventually. His world isn't that large, and my mother has friends at his school. I thought about that every day of the following week. But I also knew that reacting publicly would only extend the story and give it oxygen it didn't deserve. So I stayed quiet and kept working. The 30-day notice went out certified mail. My brother's attorney sent one response letter. My attorney answered it in 2 pages. After that, silence. The morning of the expiration, the sky was low and gray, and the air had the dense, uncommitted stillness that comes before rain that hasn't decided to fall yet. My attorney arrived at 8. I made coffee. We went through the file one last time, the certified mail receipt, the roommate agreement, the credit fraud documentation, the forged signature scans, the police report, the recording. Everything dated, everything in order. My mother arrived first, on foot up the front walk, arms folded, reading the front of the house in the way people read things they're preparing to dispute. She looked at me on the porch. I looked back at her and didn't say anything yet. Keen came out carrying photography cases, lenses wrapped carefully, tripod folded, equipment tended with a care I'd never seen him apply to paperwork. He didn't look at me directly. My sister-in-law followed with 2 rolling suitcases. She caught my eye once, briefly. There was something in her face that wasn't anger, and wasn't quite apology. Something in between, something tired. "You're making a mistake," my mother said. "Family doesn't draw these lines." Keen opened 4 accounts in my name, I said. My voice was even. I'd had weeks to practice even. He signed a forged signature on a credit application. I have the documentation, the IP records, and the account creation logs. I also have Dad's voice. I looked at her steadily. He recorded it 4 years ago. He named the pattern. He knew exactly what was happening. My mother's face moved through several expressions in quick succession. My brother stopped walking. Dad wouldn't have. He did, I said. I can play it right now if you'd like. Nobody answered that. I took a breath, not for effect, just because I needed one. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said. I'm trying to make sure my son grows up in a house where his father's name means something, where my signature on a document means something. That's all I'm protecting here. I set the police report on the porch railing where they could see it. I didn't hand it to anyone. I just let it be visible. The moving truck arrived at 10:30. By noon, the last box was in the truck, and the truck turned off the street. My attorney shook my hand on the porch. You did this exactly right, he said, every step on paper. It's the only way I know, I said. When Wilder got home from school that afternoon, he stopped in the hallway and stood still for a moment, looking at the living room, then the kitchen, the way you look at a space when something about it has shifted, but you can't immediately say what. It's quieter, he said. Yeah, I said, it is. He considered this with the seriousness he brings to most things, then put his backpack down and opened his red notebook on the kitchen table and picked up where he'd left off on whatever he was calculating that week. I made dinner. We ate. After, we went to the backyard for a test launch on the rocket he'd been modifying. Red and white, extra fins he'd added based on something he'd read about stability. The aerodynamics worked out in pencil in the notebook, the math checked twice. He set up the launcher. He reviewed his notes. He launched. The rocket cleared the oak tree by a clean margin, arsed into the gray-orange sky, and came down in the neighbor's side yard. He ran after it with his notebook already open, writing down what he'd observed before he'd even picked the rocket up off the grass. I watched him from the middle of the yard, the Raleigh sky going amber at the edges, my father's voice on a recording in my phone, my name on a deed that carries the weight it's supposed to carry, my son's sneakers hitting the grass. Later, after the rocket and the retrieval and the bath negotiation and the actual bath in the book and the second glass of water that he absolutely needed, I turned off his lamp. He was most of the way gone already, his red notebook on the nightstand where it always is. He opened his eyes at the last second. Dad, he said, this is our house? This is our house. Like it's really ours? Nobody can take it? Really ours, I said, for good. He closed his eyes. I stood in the doorway a moment longer than I needed to. In the garage, my father's toolbox sat on the shelf at the right height, in the right spot, his initials on the red lid. The recorder back in the top drawer where I can find it whenever I need to hear what it sounds like when someone who loved you told the truth. I left the garage light on for a while. Some things deserve to be seen clearly before you let the dark back in.